And a wonderful good day to one and all. This is Owen McCafferty speaking on behalf of Professional Fusion, and we have an extraordinarily special guest. Many of you have known Stacy Pursell from of a plethora of activities in veterinary medicine. You know what she has done, what she is doing, and I can guarantee you what she will do in the future for the sake of the profession of veterinary medicine. So I was lucky enough to see Stacy at the VMX meeting and petitioned her. Would she be willing to talk with us? And lo and behold, my good fortunes were there, and Stacy did agree. I just want to maybe just throw a few things out there. I'm going to embarrass Stacy. She's here in front of me, and let's see if she blushes. Stacy is internationally respected in the executive search, consulting, and recruiting area. She has distinguished herself as not only being the founder and chief executive officer of the Vet Recruiter, but as a thought leader, influencer, and key opinion leader. She's been quoted in CNN, Money Magazine, Today's Veterinary Business, AAHA, also known as the American Animal Hospital Association, the National Association of Veterinary Clinics, the North American Veterinary Clinics, probably VMX, its successor entity, AVMA, that's the American Veterinary Medical Association, for those of you that may not know, DVM 360, which is a very fine publication, and the successor in interest to other business publications, including my start at Veterinary Economics magazine. And then finally, Veterinary Information Network. And I'm sure Paul Payan, being a wonderful distinguisher of competencies and talent, was equally as lucky as I to have Stacy's competency. And let's not forget the Fountain Report, because I get that, I think, every week. And then finally, Veterinary Practice News. Now we're going to add to that Professional Fusion, when hopefully Stacy has a chance to update her curriculum vitae. And you never know, there will be even more that evolve. But it's important to give you as the audience an understanding of the competency and the accomplishment of Stacy. She's also been involved in many philanthropic activities, including an advisory board member for the Professional Science of Master's programs at Kansas State. So there's an awful lot of things I can bore you going on and on and on. But I think what's most important is, audience, you have an idea about the heavy hitter that I'm lucky enough to have with me. So the theme for today is doing God's work, because Stacy is a specialist in bringing that inventory of man hours for doctors of veterinary medicine and other support staff to the veterinary profession at the practice level. Stacy, after all of that and asking you to endure the litany of accomplishments, I'd just like to say, on behalf of Professional Fusion and myself, welcome.
Thank you so much, Owen. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for inviting me. And yes, I am blushing after listening to all of that. I think about, who is that person? That can't be me.
Oh, it most definitely is.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, I'd like to get right into it because recruitment is just so important. But it's not just recruitment. It's the art of excellence. Bringing someone into a practice is risky. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, How in the world do you match the right candidate with the right practice?
Yeah, it's not easy. And the first part of that is to really get to know the client, to really understand the client in terms of the people that are involved, the culture, and then matching that up with the candidate and who they are as a person and their skills. It's not just a matter of finding the right skills that the client has asked me to find. That's important. The person has to have the right skills in order to be qualified, in order to be hired. But it's also matching the person with the culture. And really, my superpower with that is the art of listening. You know, you mentioned this as the art. Recruiting is a science and an art. But the art, I think, is the more important part. And my superpower is my ability to listen to people and to listen to them in a way where it's not only what they're saying, but what they're not saying, and really being able to ask those probing questions. My journalism degree helps me tremendously with this. I have a degree in broadcast journalism. When I decided to major in that, because that was such a passion for me, my dad said, "What are you going to do with the journalism degree?" And I use that journalism degree every day in my line of work. And it's really just communication. It comes down to listening to what people say and asking probing questions to get to the bottom of what they mean. And that's really it. My listening skills are my superpower in recruiting.
Well, I think that's a phenomenal issue, and maybe a drop to the priesthood, because I'm sure that people confess to you things that they just wouldn't tell anybody else. And that's an essential part. Maybe knowing the whole truth instead of just the vignette that people like to espouse.
And that is so true. Sometimes I feel like their counselor, I feel like their realtor. Sometimes I become really good friends with clients and candidates. Not everyone, I'm not good friends with every client or candidate, but the relationships that I've built over the past 28 years, I have a candidate I've placed 4 times over 28 years because, one time his company relocated and he couldn't move. And so then I placed him, and then that company got bought, and then I placed him somewhere else. So over a 20 plus year period, placing that person 4 times, I have clients that I have had candidates that I've placed in jobs that have gone on to become clients. There's a vice president at one of my client companies today that I placed her in her first, she was a vet working in a practice, and I placed her in an industry position working for an animal health company. It was her first role in industry. And that was over 20 years ago. And today she's a vice president at one of my clients, and I work with her on a regular basis. So, it's developing those friendships along the way. But people do confide in me, both the clients and the candidates. The clients do when they're maybe planning a merger or acquisition, or they're getting ready to restructure their company, or they're getting ready to launch a new product or service, and there's very confidential things that are happening inside their business that are not public. Sometimes it happens whenever they need to hire somebody under the radar. I'll give an example of that. I was working with a company that was entering the veterinary space, and they did not want their competition to know that they were getting into the space. They wanted to build their team and then launch with the bang. And so I had to build their entire team under the radar without anybody knowing. And so on the candidate side, people confess in me very personal things that they're going through. Sometimes it could be something that's happened on their job. Just a week ago, I was talking with somebody that was asked to do something that they were not comfortable with at their employer, and so they made the decision to resign before they had another position lined up. And, this person shared with me, some of those details that he felt, was necessary to help me understand that this is why I made the choice to leave and why I'm pursuing another opportunity. And then sometimes there's things going on with the family. So there could be, a spouse that's getting asked to relocate, and the person's not ready to let their employer know that, yet. And so they might be, searching for another opportunity confidentially because they know they're going to be moving in a few months, or maybe something's happening, within the family with one of their children, or I just worked with a candidate that unfortunately went through a divorce and needed to make a job change as a result. So they're very personal things that they confide in me, and so I do often feel like part of my role is as a counselor, especially on the career front as a career counselor.
You ever have a problem in defining who the client really is and where your allegiances lie? Because I'm sure you will be faced with opposing views. Now, as a CPA, it's really easy for me because my life is legislative. I don't lose soul by violating a confidence, but I lose my license. And that would be as frightful. So, what do you do to maintain that distinguishment between obligation and providing the best possible service in fitting one party to another? Do you have a code that you use, or what is the specific basis upon which you make your judgments? Because that's what my clients have always asked me. How do I know the recruiter's not going to tell somebody else about me? And I said, I can assure you that will not happen.
Well, it would be career suicide to jeopardize the confidentiality of either a client or a candidate, especially in such a small niche like the animal health industry or the veterinary profession. No recruiter could last 28 plus years in jeopardizing that confidentiality. So my hallmark is confidentiality on both sides of the fence for both the client's sake and the candidate's sake. So, sometimes when I'm working with the client where it's a very confidential situation, like right now, I'm working on several searches for a client that are very confidential. And so the candidates are all required to sign NDAs. So some clients, do ask for that in confidential situations. So the candidates are all signing NDAs before I can even discuss the name of the client, and then before I can go into details of the situation on, why they're hiring. And then on the candidate side, sometimes they ask me not to share very personal information, and so I honor that. My job is to bring two people together. My ultimate fiduciary responsibility is to the client, because the client is who hires me. The client is who pays my fee. But it's my job to bring the candidate and the client together. And my mantra has been to do what's in everybody's best interest. So what's in the client's best interest and the candidate's best interest, and to bring them together where it creates a win-win for both of them. And I'm able to do that and protect the confidentiality of the client and the candidate. For example, the candidate may ask me not to share with the client that they have another offer somewhere else. Sometimes they will give me permission to share that, but sometimes they don't want that shared. So if they ask me to keep that confidential, I'll keep that confidential. Now, my job is, if my client wants to hire this candidate, my job is for my client to be able to be as competitive as possible in order to be able to hire this candidate. So knowing that the candidate has another offer, it's a little bit like a poker game. I see all the cards, but I have to keep information confidential on both sides. So the candidate might share with me, I have another offer, but I don't want you to share that. The candidate's interested in the client wants to hire the candidate. So I have to work with the client to make sure that they are going to make a competitive offer that's going to compel this candidate to accept it. So again, my hallmark is confidentiality, and I protect that on both sides.
Well, I think it's a tough thing to do, and you have to know how to match one party to another. And that in itself, I think, might be difficult because it's not all money. It's not all in inventory man hours because you bring the wrong person in, it could devastate the practice. I've seen it happen. How do you make that judgment?
How do I make the judgment about who is the best candidate?
Yes.
So it really goes back to well, I would say that, in addition to listening, another superpower of mine is discernment. In fact, I took a personality test once, and there's all these different personality tests, and I've taken many of them. But this personality test was actually for a mission-driven organization, and it said my two biggest traits were discernment and mercy. And they said that that was a very rare combination, that they rarely see those two traits combined together. But in addition to my ability to listen, a really strong skill that I have is discernment. And I know that there are all kinds of personality tests, and I have clients that that give candidates those kinds of tests during the interview process to see if they're a good fit. In my research, and plenty of clients don't use those personality tests to hire. In my research that I've done, and it's not, technical research, but it's more just asking clients when they've done those tests, what percentage of the people work out? And it's often 50-50, which is the same with clients that don't use those tests. So whether they use a personality test or not doesn't always mean they're going to get the best person. I've had clients that hired a candidate that it was, I don't get to pick the candidate. The client is, I do the search, I provide the candidates, and then the client ultimately decides. And sometimes they don't ask my opinion, sometimes they do. But I've had clients in some cases where, I'll give an example. So I was working on a retained search for a client who asked me to interview the internal candidates that were applying for the position and the candidates that I was finding, the external candidates. So I was interviewing both. And so the client made a decision to hire this internal candidate that I had interviewed and didn't think that was the person they needed to promote for that position. And I thought they should hire this other candidate. They did ask my opinion, and I was getting paid the same regardless if they hired the external candidate or the internal. So, I wasn't, just in case anybody thinks, well, she's recommending the internal because she gets paid. No, I was getting paid the same to interview both. I thought they should hire this external candidate. And the reason why is the internal candidate, when I would ask certain questions, it was all about her career, and she was wanting this position to get ahead in her career. The external candidate was very mission driven. His answers were all about the organization and helping the organization. The internal candidate seemed to have a very selfish perspective about wanting the position. And so my client ultimately hired the internal candidate. It didn't work out. The person was ultimately fired from the company in less than 6 months of being promoted into that role. I think if the person hadn't have been promoted, the person probably would have still been within the organization, but it just wasn't the right role for the organization to promote that person. So my discernment was that they should go with the external candidate. They didn't. But I have a really strong ability to discern. It's almost a gut feeling. It's not a science. But it's worked for me over the years. And there are so many people that I've placed in the industry, like the person I mentioned, I placed over 20 years ago in her first industry role, that's now a vice president of a major company in our industry. And there's many people like that I've identified for companies in our space, sometimes at an earlier stage in their career, they get promoted to a very high level senior leadership role. There was a person that I saw just this week at a meeting who I placed with this company. I lose track of time, but if I'm guessing, it's probably 15 to 20 years ago. And this person is in a C-level role at this company today. So I just have this ability to discern, and it comes from my listening skills, and not only what they're saying, but what they're not saying, and my ability to ask the right probing questions. But how I find the right person, it goes listening, looking for the skills that the employer needs to have, but also assessing culture, getting to understand the client, their culture, what kind of candidate would fit their culture best, and then listening to the different candidates, and just an assessment on who I believe will be the best fit for the company.
So I guess as you were talking, I was thinking of John Donne. His my undergraduate degree is English. And in it, he poses, tell me where's fancy bread, in the heart or in the head? And that reminds me of your capacity towards discernment. And I think that's a phenomenal activity. Okay, you've worked with doctors for, gosh, almost a third of a century, uh, less than that. Obviously, looking at your face, you're just a child. But uh, I do know that you've had multiple decades, and in it, uh, you understand the mind of a doctor as the mind of a CPA or an attorney or registered nurse or anybody else, and they're used to dealing in transactional activity. And one of the big questions that they will pose, and you know this, is, well, I would love to engage Stacy. I would kill to engage Stacy. I don't know if I can afford the skill set, the competency of someone of Stacy's caliber. Could you just walk through for our audience what the kind of financial relationship that exists in securing your services, and maybe some war stories of how it's worked one way versus another?
Sure, I can. So, we have multiple ways that we can work together. So, we can work on a full retained basis, where the client pays a third of the fee up front, a third in the middle of the search, and then the final third once the placement is made. We also take some searches on a contingency basis, where the client only pays when the position is filled. And then we have a third model, which was actually requested by a client, and we've had other clients request it since, where it's a hybrid of the retained and the contingency search, where the client pays a portion of the fee up front, and then the rest of the fee when the position is filled, instead of having that third piece there in the middle. We prioritize our searches. The full retainers get the highest level of priority. We work on all the searches. The contingency searches are still high priority, but the client's not paying anything up front. And so we do have to prioritize the retained searches first. I'll give an example. So we have clients that do both at the same time. So I've recently been working with a client that signed a retained fee schedule for a CEO position. So they paid the first third up front. And then they have some other positions that are on a full contingency. So we're working on all the searches, but on the contingency, they only pay when we fill the position. So some clients might have multiple agreements, and then they prioritize the importance level of the different searches. I can give an example of a client that was looking for a doctor for 6 months. They could not find one. I asked them what was the cost of having that position vacant. It was a newer person in the role. He was a vice president, but he was a little bit new to the industry. He said he thought it was costing him at least 400,000 a year. I think it was more, to not have a doctor in that position, and they'd been looking for 6 months. I found them a doctor. In her first month, she brought in 35,000 of revenue into the practice. In her second month, she brought in 40,000 in revenue into the practice. So, uh, over 70,000 in revenue in the first 2 months. My fee was much less than that. So within 2 months, the revenue that she produced more than offset the cost of the fee. And the client recognized that. He said, "Wow, I wish we had hired you 6 months earlier because we would have been well on our way to, her producing this revenue. And it was the opportunity cost of not having somebody in that role for 6 months, which is more expensive than paying the fee and getting a good producer into the position."
No question. Could you just throw numbers at us? Because that's the most difficult thing to understand. So, for example, when I do any work for any client, I have to send out an engagement letter. In that engagement letter, I quote the hourly rate, or if it's a specified fee for service, such as evaluation, a range, because you can never know. There's something called mission creep where things just start to go up and up and up, and you really don't know at the beginning. And what's represented as a need in the beginning and what is the need at the end may be two entirely different things. I'm sure the same thing happens to you.
Yes.
But if you're setting your fee, how do you set the fee? Is it a dollar amount? Is it a percentage of earnings? Is it a percentage of salary? How do you set your fee?
So the fee is a range. We'll quote the client their exact fee up front, but it's a range depending on the level of difficulty of the position. So it's a
Mhm.
percentage. It's a percentage of the person that we place. It's a percentage of their first year salary. So for a general practice doctor in a vet practice, are you wanting exact numbers or just
Well, yeah, what would you do for an average person who comes to you and says, Stacy, I want you. I just need to know what the terms of the engagement are because I have to budget for it.
Sure. So if it's your average general practice veterinarian, our fee is 25% of their first year's salary. If I'm working with a animal health company that needs, because I've worked on searches like this where there's 50 people in the world that are qualified. For
Mhm.
example, I worked on a search where they needed a DVM, PhD, swine specialist in the vaccine area, a certain skill set where there were around 50 people in the world, that were qualified to do that. So my fees range in between 25 and 35%. If it's a very difficult search for a scientist where there's 50 people in the world, it's 35%. If it's a vet in a GP practice, it's 25%. So we quote it based on the level of difficulty. I recently worked on another search, so it was 35%, because there were 80 something people in the world that had the qualifications that the client
Mhm.
needed. So the more difficult, it's going to be that higher end. It's going to be the 33 to 35%. And if it's a GP and your average vet clinic, it's going to be 25%.
Do you ever work on an hourly basis?
I have just a couple times. That's not something that I commonly do, but I have done that for a couple of clients.
Okay. And then if I was to say down the road, uh, and let's say I'm in a practice that has a lot of needs, would you be willing to negotiate? Let's say you use the word retainer, and that's taken from the French word retenir, which means to entice. So, would you be willing to be enticed to be basically uh, a part-time talent recruiter for a practice or a series of practices, do you make special accommodation for, let's say, a continuity engagement?
It depends on the situation. So, typically not, and I'll explain, but there are a couple of exceptions. So,
Okay.
we have a client that we have worked with for about 28 years. And this client could have 400 positions open at any given time. Now, this client also has 30 something internal recruiters working on those openings. So they rely on us to, when we find people, send them over, but they also have their internal recruiters, they're posting ads, they're using, all of the different ways that they can find people. So I would say that client's more grandfathered in at a slightly lower rate because we've worked with them for so long. There's a loyalty factor. And sometimes we'll make an exception if there are a lot of ongoing needs. The reason that we don't typically do that, especially now, is because every search is just as difficult as the next. If a practice needs 10 doctors, finding that 10th doctor is the same level of difficulty as finding the first doctor. Sometimes, because we do work on positions that are not veterinarian roles, such as sales positions. So where we more commonly would do something like that would be an animal health company that's building a sales team, and maybe they need 25 or 30, or they're expanding. Salespeople are easier to find than veterinarians are. So we
Sure.
might do a special rate or a discount, or we might do something like, every third placement, there's a special rate. But typically we will do that more with on the sales side, and not with vets and clinics, just because of the level of difficulty to find them.
Your disclosure is phenomenal. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your frankness, honorability, and honesty. And I think is a very difficult question, but that is the exact first question that comes from the lips of a doctor to my ears. How much does it cost? And this is an invaluable narrative because it provides someone with clear guidance, no questions, out of that action opportunity uh, by just getting through that first vestige.
Well,
But
it's not inexpensive to hire a recruiter. It's an investment. But people are the most important asset to any business, I believe, because you can't
exactly,
run a business without people, and it takes the right people. And like I mentioned with the practice that had an opening for 6 months, it's that opportunity cost, it's that lost revenue of not having a good person, in that role. So, we had a client that did a study. This was quite a number of years ago, but we had a large corporate group that did a study, and they found that the doctors that we placed with them had longer retention rates than the doctors that they were finding on their own, which I thought was very interesting. So they were investing in hiring a search firm to find those doctors, but they found that the doctors that we placed stayed longer than ones they were finding on their own.
well, sure, quality and excellence always costs more, doesn't it?
It does.
You you can't take a Ruth Chris Steakhouse and compare it with the McDonald's franchise. It
No,
just
you
doesn't
can't.
work.
That's right.
So I do appreciate that. That I think that is a phenomenal issue. Uh, what other things do you do? What kind of similar services? If somebody wanted to engage you for the full plethora of skill sets that you have, keeping in mind that you've been through this, there's probably not too many war stories that you haven't seen. What other things can you do for those doctors of veterinary medicine that are either trying to grow or fill a present position after an untimely departure. And the last question I'm going to pose on it is, who do you search for? Do you search for doctors, obviously? Do you search for technicians? Do you search for practice managers? Do you search for reception group, client services representatives? How do you search? And who do you search? And how can I take advantage of the full plethora of things that you can do for me, Stacy, as a doctor of veterinary medicine?
Sure. So in the practice setting, the people that that I look for are primarily veterinarians. We don't place technicians in practices or the CSRs. And we really don't often place the practice managers unless it's more of a director of operations or it's somebody that's managing multiple sites. Most of the people that we place have a salary that's above 100,000. So those will be the doctors or the executives. So I've placed regional medical directors, area medical directors, chief veterinary officers, chief medical officers. So typically I'm placing people, in that are making compensation in the 100 to 500,000 dollar range. So these are the doctors and the higher level people. On the animal health industry side, I do place technicians if they're in roles like sales or pharmacovigilance, or sales supporting roles. So maybe like a diagnostic company that I was placing salespeople with, we're hiring techs to follow up with the doctors after the sale, or they were hiring them to implement the diagnostic equipment after the salesperson sold it. So on the animal health industry side, I work with pharmaceutical companies, diagnostic companies, companies that make products or services that are sold to veterinary clinics. So those could be nutrition companies, companies that sell software, practice management software, or other types of services. So with those companies, I'll place salespeople, people in marketing, people in pharmacovigilance. Those are the people that handle adverse event issues when they come up. Regulatory affairs people. So those are the people that work with the regulatory bodies to get drugs approved. So they work with the FDA or the EPA. Or the USDA. I do a lot of executive placements, so that could be a CEO. I placed a CEO recently of a group of practices, chief operations officers, heads of marketing, heads of sales, heads of R&D. I just placed a chief innovation officer for an animal health company that's looking to do a startup within their company to get into some other areas. So lots of different roles across the animal health industry. On the veterinary practice side, however, it's mostly the doctors or executives. I also do board placements and advisory board placements. So I just built a advisory board for a startup company. They needed they needed somebody with a regulatory background. They needed somebody with an R&D background. They needed somebody that was an innovator. So I put together an advisory board for them.
What about for tax exempt organizations? Because within veterinary medicine, there's just a massive number of animal welfare groups.
Yes.
Sorry about that. It's that time of year, kid, and you know what happens. All and every solicitor for Medicare, Medicaid is calling you between now and probably December 8th. So I do apologize for that. So with the tax exempt organizations, specifically the ones that need doctors or the ones that need someone who's affiliated with veterinary medicine as a profession, but may not be in it. do you fill tax exempt organizations needs?
We work with a lot of nonprofit organizations in all different areas. So we just worked with a very large shelter. We found them an executive director. We just found them two veterinarians. One is a high volume spay and neuter doctor, and the other one is a director of medicine. And we're about to place another doctor with them. We have several interviewing right now, so we're about to place another doctor, and they might even hire another doctor after this doctor because they're going to be doing an expansion. I've worked with many shelters, humane societies. Over the years, I've placed people with organizations like Guide Dogs for the Blind, ASPCA, Morris Animal Foundation, lots of nonprofit organizations. And we have found them doctors, we've placed executives, I've placed a head of marketing for a nonprofit. We've placed people that do fundraising. I placed a couple of directors for a nonprofit to do fundraising and organize events for their fundraising.
My God, how do you have the time to put your head on the pillow at night?
Well, you mentioned I've been doing this for almost 3 decades. So,
I
um,
know.
I'm looking back over the past. This year I started my 29th year. In
Congratulations.
the thank you in the so next year I'll say I'm starting my 30th year. So that's a lot of years. So I have a lot of examples to pull from.
Well, if at some of the meetings somebody wants to get a hold of you, then maybe sit down and talk. I'm sure you might be available for meetings in the course of sessions such as the Western Conference, the Wild West, VMX, the New England Veterinary Medical Association meeting. I'm sure there's a lot of places that people are soliciting just a moment of time with you. Are you open to that?
Yes. Yeah, this year alone, well, the year's not over, but when the year is over, I'll have attended 14 major events this year. And so next week, I'll be at New York Vet. And then in December, I'll be at they've changed the name, but it's in Los Angeles. It's a pet care summit. That's not the official
Mhm.
name. I can't remember what it's called. And then in January, I'll be at VMX. I'm speaking at VMX. I'm with Dr. Deb Nicholson. We're putting together a master class. And it's an add-on. So people that are attending VMX can do the add-on and sign up for the master class. There's a small fee for them to do that, but they can do that as part of their registration. And we'll be talking for 2 hours about many things related to careers. So they can bring their resumes. We'll look at individual resumes. We'll talk about cover letters, personal branding, salary negotiations. We're going to do mock interviews. We'll also have the vet recruiter will have a booth at VMX. So people can come by the booth. They can come to the master class. I'll be at WVC in Vegas in February. The vet recruiter will
Yeah.
have a booth there as well. We were at AVMA. We do AVMA every year. I usually speak at AVMA. So I speak at quite a few of the conferences. We have a booth at the conferences, so they could come to the booth. They could come see me speak. But they can also reach out to me through the website, thevetrecruiter.com. And I'm always open to having meetings. And to answer your question, do I ever sleep? If you ask my husband that question, he would say very little. Um, I was up here till 9 o'clock last night, but I'm an empty nester now. My youngest son went to college in August, and I love what I do. I don't work 8 to 5. I am often here till had a client call me last week on Friday at excuse me at 6:15, and I said, "You knew I would still be here," and he said, "I did." So they can reach out. I'm always happy to schedule a time to talk.
Well, in showing the difference, my youngest son is my partner here at our firm, and he has had 35 years in veterinary medicine.
Wow.
But at 10 years of age, I had him working in the practice. So it's it's a little bit different. But I just want to say you are truly an accomplished, competent, moral person. And it's rare to find that kind of talent in an activity as challenging as finding the right people for the right job.
Well, thank you. And I love what you said about your son. I have three kids that work in the animal health or the veterinary profession. And like your son, growing up working with you in the practice, my kids started going to vet shows when they were like 2 years old and have gone to so many vet shows over the years. My oldest daughter works for the VMX now, and my youngest daughter works for an animal health company, and my son is working for a company doing inventory management in the vet space. He's also a senior in college, but I love that your son has grown up in the space and that you've had the opportunity to work with him. And I love that I have three kids working in the space. It's a wonderful space to be in.
Well, my daughter Mara is an attorney, but many of the folks that are listening to us right now probably remember Mara because she worked 11 years with me before she went to St. Thomas Law School. Now she works for the firm locally. And then my baby, Bridget, worked with us for approximately 8 years. And then she moved to to California, to Santa Monica. And she now has two children of her own. But veterinary medicine has a way of bringing families together. There's absolutely no question. I've got one favor to ask of you. I've got a task for a future meeting, and I don't know if you'd be willing to do it. This is a toughie. This is not an easy one. This relates to what's going on in the topic of gender and generational nuances in the evolution of the veterinary profession. Because I've been doing this now within veterinary medicine for 47 years
Oh,
straight. And I've seen an awful lot of change. And I remember very well the traditionalists, the boomers, the Gen Xers. They used to be called Gen Yers. I guess they're millennials now because that's another world. And then we have a new group of folks coming through, the Gen Zers. And from what I understand, the alphas
yeah.
are not that far behind.
I was just reading this week about the alphas, trying to understand that generation and what will be next on the horizon.
Well, Stacy, can I solicit you because of your experience to maybe talk with our audience at a future discussion about gender and generational issues and how they evolved over the various components? Because you've probably seen the same number of people that I've recited, and you understand the nuance. And maybe for our audience to give some ideas and tips and thoughts and perspectives that would really help people.
Sure. Well, when I started working in the veterinary profession, almost 30 years ago, like I said, I'm starting my 29th year. I started my 29th year in August. It was mostly a male dominated industry. And, when I started, before I started my own firm, I worked for a large international firm and I had a boss. And, I ultimately bought out the business that I had started within his firm and went on my own. But when I had a boss, he said to me, he said, Stacy, there is no need for a recruiter in the veterinary space. He said, veterinary practices are all family owned businesses. They're owned by men that are the veterinarians, and their wives are the practice manager. And that's what he told me. And today, almost 30 years later, there are many recruiters in the veterinary profession. I was the first to specialize as an agency recruiter in this space. So I've seen a lot of things over the years, including the gender. What my boss didn't see at the time was the corporatization veterinary medicine because it was mostly independently owned practices. And now, as you know, many of the practices now are owned by corporations. Is it
Right.
35%? Is that
I think it's a little bit lower than that. I think it's more like maybe 25%. Uh, but
25%?
but but to your point, they sure do have the biggest practices that they have acquired.
Yes.
And that, you know what, in the future, that also may be a very interesting topic area. I'm going to impose on you with requests and petitions to be in future sessions if you do want.
I would love that. And to further elaborate on your question about the gender, so when I started, it was mostly men veterinarians, and then today it's a majority of females that are graduating from veterinary schools. I've seen everything from 80% to 90% to 93%. It's somewhere in that range. Isn't it 90% of
It's 86% for the last
86%?
probably for the last 5 years. But
86% are female. So what I have noticed is the work schedule has changed. So when I started, the veterinarian would graduate from vet school. I've had people, tell me this too, that they would graduate and then the next they would move across the country on a weekend and start their new job on Monday. And they would work, many of them 6 days a week. They would work on Saturdays. They would work late hours. They didn't go home at 5 o'clock. They would handle emergencies. They would be on call. Today, it seems like the normal work week is 4 days. In some cases, it's 3 days. We have many doctors now that will not work weekends, including Saturdays. We have doctors turning down offers if the practice requires them to stay past 5 o'clock.
no kidding.
To give an
Wow.
example, I had a new grad turn down an offer because the practice was open until 7 o'clock on Thursdays, and she wanted to leave at 5 o'clock. And it was a great offer. So we have doctors now that'll turn down offers because it requires them to work any weekend work, or it requires them to stay past 5 o'clock. Um, there are, I talked to a boarded internist who was a female who only worked 1 day a week because and I was talking to somebody the other day. It was actually a candidate last week that I placed in a practice, and he's a male. And he said that the majority of the doctors that he works with are female. And he worked in a practice and then he left to do relief work for a few years. And I just placed him back in a practice as a full-time doctor. But he said with all these practices where he was doing relief work, it was mostly females. And he said many of them had spouses that they consider to be the primary breadwinner. So he said many of these women, vet med was more of a lifestyle business for them, where they just worked, when they wanted to, where they worked relief. But many of them were not working, 4 or 5 days a week. And so, we've seen a shift in the number of hours that people working. Another thing that I've noticed, and not just in the vet practices, but in industry too, and I'll give an example of this. Over this past summer, working with this client on some executive level placements, they made an offer to a female candidate for an executive role, and this was a salary in the 200 plus range, plus some pretty incredible benefits and other incentives. But the candidate that they made an offer to started to bring up a lot of conversations about childcare because the job required some travel. And so she voiced to both myself and to the hiring company, how was she going to manage this new executive role with the travel required and the childcare? And just, coming out of that situation, she ended up turning down the position, and I ended up finding somebody else for the position. But I was thinking about this because this was a high level executive role. And male candidates, they don't bring up topics about childcare typically during interviews. If they need to organize childcare, they do it, but they don't mention it to the recruiter or to their future boss. Women will often voice those types of things in an interview to the recruiter or the hiring manager. I'm not saying, this is right or wrong. I'm just saying it's a difference in the sexes that, men have children also. But those are things that they typically work out behind the scenes. Those are not topics that come up, in a job interview situation. Um, I've had women turn down jobs. There's a lot of conversation about, and this is a sensitive subject, but there's a lot of conversation
That's
about
the best.
women, not getting advancement opportunities. But I've seen women sabotage themselves in job interview situations, and I'll give a couple of examples to that. I had a veterinarian that was female veterinarian that was interviewing for a high-level executive role with a very big company. She turned down the job. The reason she turned it down was because the company had interviewed the internal candidates for the position. The hiring manager did not believe the internal candidates were qualified for this high level role. So the hiring manager made the decision to go outside. And so I brought, a number of candidates. They had settled on this one particular candidate who they made the offer to. She voiced to me after she got the offer that she was concerned that the other people internally that did not get the job would have their feelings hurt that they didn't get the job, and they were bringing somebody from the outside in to lead them. And she was thinking that they would be up, she thought they were going to be upset with her, and she didn't want to put herself in that position. I said to her, I said, I hear what you're saying. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm simply saying that no man would ever say that. Like, I have never had a male voice that in an interview. I've had men compete for jobs with their best friends with the attitude, may the best man win. I've
Sure.
had women not apply for jobs because their best girlfriend was applying for the same job and they did not want to compete for the job with a good friend of theirs. So it's just, different on how sometimes men look at things and how women. I placed a sales rep with a company in Texas, and his best friend works for the competitor, and they compete every day out in the field. But on the weekends, they can go out together and hang out and be best friends. But during the workday, they are competing in the same territory for two competing companies. So those are some differences that I've seen along the ways in how men approach things and how women approach things.
Stacy, if we can go through that, I mean, let's just take the gloves off and look at reality based on your experience. Uh, I think we could do a phenomenal service for the viewers of Professional Fusion because it'll give them a perspective that rarely do they ever have. And I'm so indebted. One last issue, Stacy. If people want to get a hold of you, and obviously anybody contacting me, I will be more than ecstatic to give them your contact information. And we'll put that in the notes of uh, the Professional Fusion narrative here. But just so everybody can hear it, because sometimes auditory response is good. If I want to get a hold of you, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Yes. So there's two ways. You can go to the website, thevetrecruiter.com, so www.thevetrecruiter.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn and you can email me through LinkedIn. It's and I'm sure you'll put this in there, but my last name is spelled with an S and not a C. So it's Stacy Pursell. It's Pursell and not Cell, because some people try to find it spelling it with the C and it's an S.
Makes perfect sense. Well, I sure do appreciate it, and I'm counting on you. I'd love to go through the gender and the generational issues. And then we can maybe add another layer of wisdom to the very difficult area of hiring the right people for the correct practice.
I
So
welcome
I,
that.
well, I sure do appreciate it. This is Owen McCafferty asking everyone to remember to tune in to Professional Fusion and to understand that we bring guests of the caliber of Stacy Pursell, and she is without peer. I'd like to say thank you very much, Stacy. You're a kind person, and we will be continuing these discussions in the future.
Owen,
Thank you.
thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you.
Well, pleasure's all mine.